Hello and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. The date is November 16th, 2015. It is 2:37 p.m. Mountain Time. I'm broadcasting to you from my basement here in North Logan, Utah. And I'm very excited to have with me Alison Udall. Alison is known throughout social media within Mormonism as being a very active and effective contributor and participator. But I think her biggest splash to date, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Alison, is when she teamed with my friend Steve Holbrook and a few other friends to create a website that has become very important for progressive and post-Mormons called Mormon Spectrum. You can find it at mormonspectrum.org. And there's several cool things about the site that we'll get into, but probably the two most important things about Mormon Spectrum are, number one, it sort of explicitly names and profiles various types of Mormons, such that people can really start developing a vocabulary and an understanding of the fact that there are various types of Mormons, and people can start to explore and understand their identities and their situations in life better. And so there are resources made available for people based on, whether they're whatever type of Mormon they happen to be. And we can talk about that. But the other thing that's really important about Mormon Spectrum, and what I've seen as being the most impactful so far, is that it puts up a map of in-person, face-to-face, sort of geographically based communities across the world, such that if you are looking for local face-to-face support, you can go to Mormon Spectrum and find community. And for progressive and post-Mormons, I think the value of community cannot be overstated. So this is actually going to be a joint release. I'm going to release this episode both through Mormon Stories and through Mormon Transitions podcast, because it's going to be important and valuable for both audiences. So with that, Alison Udall, welcome to Mormon Stories and Mormon Transitions.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So let's just start just hearing a bit about your background with the church and sort of the events that led to you wanting to get involved in online progressive post-Mormonism.
Sure. Let's see. I was born in Germany. My dad worked for the service. He was in military intelligence. My dad was born in 1928 in Utah, so he had grown up in Utah and Idaho area. My mom was full-blood German. Her parents are all her bloodline's German. And she was born in 1941, and she joined the church in 61. So she was 20 years old when she joined the church. She grew up in a Catholic family, and the missionaries taught her the lessons after she was dating a Mormon boy. So they met in Germany, and my dad majored at BYU in German and took this position. So I spent 12 years living over there in Germany, in different parts of Germany, growing up. So that was a little bit different for me, because a lot of times online when you're interacting with people, most of them or many of them have grown up in much more predominant Mormon areas, or at least in the United States. And so sometimes when I share my experiences, they're a little bit unique because of the fact that I grew up in small little German branches. And what the only material that we had in those branches was what came from the church. So because we were over there, I didn't get to attend EFY. We didn't have a Deseret bookstore. We didn't have those kinds of things. We would get on the duty train when I lived in Berlin before the wall came down. I would get on the duty train, go overnight to make it to the Frankfurt Temple or the Frankfurt area, so that you could meet and have conferences together. And you'd have large groups of youth that would come together, and they would rent out like a hotel, and they'd have a general authorities come, and that's how we would do our youth conferences. So when we did have them, they were kind of like bigger events because we had to come from such distance. So a lot of my friends were non-members, but I think when I was 16, the only boy my age that I could have dated probably might have been my brother. So that didn't work out so well.
That would be a problem.
Yeah.
Even for Mormons, that's a problem.
Yeah, yeah. When I was baptized at age 8, I was baptized in a German public swimming pool. So
Oh,
they
cool.
closed the pool down, and that's where I had my baptism. So, that upbringing was a little bit unique. Everything that I experienced was official narrative from the church. My parents are very Orthodox, very conservative, Orthodox, traditional. And so growing up, I remember having some questions about things, but they kind of, my dad took just a very traditional approach to those, and that's kind of how my childhood went. When I reached about 14, I rebelled, and between 14 and 18, I was actually very inactive, which caused a lot of stress for my family. My brother at that time, I have an older brother who came out to me as being gay. That was a unique experience as a teenager because he came to me to disclose that. And I was young. I had no experience, no understanding. And I actually think that I was the one that told my parents, thinking that that might be helpful, to let them know, which was a disaster. And was my parents did not handle that well at all. They now, to their credit, my parents are really wonderful people. It's just that they're very believing, traditional, and they very much are loyal and rely on the church. And at that time, if you can imagine, that would have been during the time period where the messaging regarding LGBT stuff would have been really harsh. And so that messaging came to my brother, and that was really hard. He spent a summer at a church pineapple farm in Hawaii, where it was not unusual to send kids that might be having problems. Having homosexual feelings was one of those considered. He went there and worked for a summer on that church pineapple farm.
That's still there. People still
really
send their gay and problem kids to that pineapple farm.
And that experience for my brother was very traumatic.
Yeah.
That's not a good experience. He was bullied, and so that had always been, LGBT issues had always been something that had been close to me because of that issue with my brother, and watching how my parents had navigated that. My parents pretty much took whatever the official church line was, and that's what they adopted with my brother. And they really felt, at that time, the messaging was extremely strong, obviously, that it could be changed and that it was a choice, that it was not inherent, and that if he was just righteous enough and tried hard enough. And so he served a mission. He went to BYU, he served a mission, he came back. And when he came back, he came to visit me, and he basically said, I just think that the brethren are wrong on this. I can't accept that they're right on this. And I've got to the point where I'm just going to accept myself and leave the church. And that was really traumatic because my parents did not know how to navigate that and wrote him a letter, which was extremely hurtful and painful. And he basically lived in his car for a while and came extremely close to committing suicide.
What year did he write that letter to your parents? Or
that would have been in the 80s.
Oh, wow. That's early. Yeah.
And so, he had been at BYU campus with the counseling, there where they had, the messaging was not good and healthy towards students that were going through this.
It's better now, but yeah, I'm sure.
Oh, it's much better now.
Yeah.
But he was basically, he says, really, he credits not killing himself and being saved to a very unorthodox family that lived in California, where he was at the time. And this family took him in, and they were an active, believing family, just unorthodox and nuanced. And they loved him and accepted him and reached out to him, and they basically saved his life. And since then, he's gone on, and he actually he's married. He's married to a wonderful man. They've been together for almost 20 years now.
Wow.
And really happy and wonderful.
That's cool.
But that whole thing had really kind of attuned me to LGBT issues, and kind of had always been in the back of my mind as I couldn't quite sort out. I couldn't quite figure it out. Through my teenage years when I was inactive, that really put a lot of pressure on my family. And my dad put in for us to be transferred back to the United States. He felt that would be better and get me back on the path. So my 16th birthday, we moved from Berlin, where we were living, and moved to a small Arizona town called Sierra Vista, kind of down by Nogales. There was a military intelligence school there, and my dad taught there. And that was a huge shock to have come from, grown up in Germany and then moved to the desert out in the middle of nowhere. That was really hard for me.
Nogales was in my mission. The last 4 months of my mission were in the Tempe, Arizona mission. And Nogales was part of that mission in, 1990. And it was considered one of the holes of the mission.
Yeah, that's kind of how I would have put it too. And I'm sure Sierra Vista's grown quite a bit since then. But at the time, it was kind of like one long street called Fry Boulevard, filled with fast food restaurants, and that was nothing else to do.
French Fry Boulevard.
Yeah. So I got a job at McDonald's, and I made the French fries while being in high school, and tried to make that work. I ended up the end of my junior year actually dropping out of high school. I dropped out of high school, did finish. And basically my parents and I decided I would go try to live with an uncle in Ogden, Utah, and see if that could kind of help me get my act together. And so that was kind of, an interesting time of my life. When things because when I look at it now, what was interesting to me now when I look back is I really had not been given the skills to make healthy life decisions and choices. It had always been framed as just right or wrong, and not so much how to give more context and background to why you make these kind of decisions. What are the implications? And so I wasn't equipped with the skill set to handle some of the things that approach you when you leave the church as a teenager. And I made some poor choices, and I hit rock bottom. And I called my dad. I had moved to Seattle and was living there. Called my dad and said, "Dad, I'm ready to come home, and I'm ready to figure out what I'm doing." And my dad was amazing. And he rented a U-Haul, and he drove all the way from Arizona, and he came and he got me, and he brought me home to Sierra Vista. And that was the first time that my parents were able to actually start to talk to me a little openly, and our relationship started to mend. And I think it was a wonderful time for me to be able to actually open up and share with them a little bit, and have them not just tell me what was right and wrong, and quote the brethren. So, but
how many siblings did you have total?
I have 3 other siblings.
In addition to your brother, or including your brother?
Yeah, my brother. Mm-hmm, yeah.
Okay,
so there's 4 of us total.
Okay, got it. Okay.
And so I came back to Sierra Vista, decided to come back to the church. The thing is, when you're raised in the church, you're told that when you leave the church, you're going to be miserable. you're going to make horrible decisions. And when you're caught kind of in that middle road, you have a lot of guilt about your decisions. And so I was ready to be done with that guilt. I was ready to have the support from my family again. I was 17, living on my own. I had been living in a trailer, working 2 jobs to support myself. And so I was ready to come back, have parental support, have the church community support. And I got my GED. I decided to apply to Arizona State University, and I got accepted.
You're a Sun Devil.
Yeah. So I went to ASU, And in the process of doing that, also, I went through a church discipline court at age 17.
What?
I just turned 18. Yeah. And when I went to my bishop and said I wanted to do the right thing and I wanted to come back, he felt that they needed to hold a court. And so I was disfellowshipped officially. And I don't I don't think, I mean, I definitely, because it was disfellowshipment, I didn't have to go in, I didn't have to talk in front of anybody other than my bishop. I just had to talk through everything with my bishop, which was hard as a young woman to sit in the office with my bishop and talk through all of that and have him ask me specific questions. But I decided I was going to do it right. And so for 6 months, I reported to my bishop. We had conversations or emails, and I reported how I was doing. And I threw myself into the Arizona State University program there for the church had, and took classes. I attended the ward, and tried to blend in. The hard part for me was that I wasn't a typical Mormon young woman. I had kind of wild hair. I had a wild car that I had graffitied, and I had never enjoyed doing homemaking stuff. That was part of the problem for me. Was as a teenage girl, they were going to teach you how to cook or how to do something and put something in your hope chest, and I just thought that was boring. And I wanted to do the stuff that the boys were doing, and I couldn't figure out why we couldn't do more exciting things. Why we had to prepare to get married when we were teenagers. And so that was a challenge for me at ASU to try to pull myself back into that more traditional box. So it was a very interesting time for me, but I made really good friends. And I met my husband, Jordan. Jordan Udall, and he was just returned from his mission in Japan. He's from a big family, extended family there in Arizona. A lot of Udalls there, and his parents were wonderful. His dad had been a stake president and a regional rep, and very well known in the church, and just great people. And the first time that I was going to meet them, I was really concerned because I still had kind of a more wild hairdo and my car. And so I actually rented a sander and primed my car myself, painted it over, and grew my hair out so that it wouldn't be quite as shocking as mother and father, and tried to blend in.
Because the Udall family, there have been at least a few U.S. senators or members of the House of Representatives that come from the Udall clan. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. They have some pretty well-known politicians, as well as well-known in the church, as far as serving in different callings too. So a well-known family.
But also Democrats, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's funny to hear Jordan. He says kind of, that was the other side of the family. His dad, I think, would say that in that regard, they were quite different. His dad was more definitely on the Republican conservative. And then you had, Stuart Udall and Mo Udall, and they were more on the Democrat side. And then you had, Stuart Udall and some of those that weren't active any longer in the church. But the majority of Udalls were very active. And
I went to BYU with the Joe Udall, by the way.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that was, we had a very short courtship, very, very short. When I think about it now, I think it's absolutely insane. But, we dated 3 weeks and we got engaged.
Whoa.
And yeah, yeah. When we got married in the Mesa Temple, and that was wonderful. And he was finishing his bachelor's at Arizona State. 6 months after we got married, we kind of had a surprise pregnancy. And so I kept working as long as I could. And then we had our first child. And he was still finishing up. And 3 months after we had our first child, we ended up being pregnant again. and my father-in-law said, are you sure you guys know how this works? and so we did, but we just, yeah. So we ended up having another baby, and our son was born. So, they're about 11 and a half months apart, the first two. And he was born actually during the last finals that my husband had at ASU for his bachelor's. I didn't get to attend his graduation because I was in the hospital. And about 5 days later, we loaded the U-Haul and we moved to Provo, Utah, so that he could start BYU Law School. And so that was a really exciting time and a hard time because we had, two little ones, and Jordan was trying to navigate fatherhood and being a first-year law student. But that was a great experience. We made good friends there. And when we graduated from there, we moved kind of all over the place. Probably the first 15 years of our marriage, we moved 12 times because during law school, you clerk at different places. And then after law school, Jordan decided he kind of got into law software at BYU with another fellow professor that was doing some things. And so he decided rather than going into a law firm, he would work for a publishing company, a legal publishing company. And
Was
so
that
we moved kind of all
LexisNexis?
over. Yeah.
Okay.
And so we moved to Colorado, we moved to Missouri, we moved to Massachusetts. We just moved all around as he had these different consulting projects and things that he did. And it was great because we always had a ward to welcome us. We were very active and just a normal, traditional little family. And
Alison, real quick, I had you put the microphone a little bit too close to your mouth. Push it like five inches away from your mouth. I'm hearing your P's pop.
Okay.
And it'll just be better audio. Sorry about that. It's
Okay.
my fault.
Fine.
It's my fault.
Is that better?
Say Peter Piper picked a pickup pickle pepper. That's
Peter
perfect.
Piper picked a
That's
pickle.
perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So keep going.
So let's see. So we moved all around. We got to Massachusetts. We had a third child by now, and we were very active. Held callings and all different kinds of things, and we finally made it to Ohio. When we moved, we transferred, and Jordan was able to get a job with LexisNexis still in Ohio and as a full-time employee. And when we got to Ohio, we ended up staying there for 15 years. So it moved around a whole lot, and then we plopped down in Ohio, which was not a state we ever thought we would end up in. And that was a wonderful place to raise our family. The Midwest is a great area. And through that, the last few years, Jordan had been doing some homework, researching about how your brain works. And he was interested in what happened physiologically in your brain when you made decisions and you felt emotions, and he'd had some things that he wanted to change about himself that he was trying to understand, and that kind of fueled his interest in this studying, and he was reading a lot. And he had a day where he remembers distinctly that basically he came to this realization where he believed that the experiences that he'd had that were spiritual were actually physiological, that they were responses to his upbringing, the connections that had been made and forged through all of those various things that impact your brain. And when that realization came to him, it was as if everything on his shelf kind of then, he didn't know how to put it back up. He didn't feel that he could rely on spiritual experiences in order to discover those, because now he thought those were just physiological occurrences. And so he, for 2 years, tried to get that testimony back, tried to figure out a way.
What years would have this been?
That would have been, in 2000, the early 2000s, 2004, 5, 6.
Okay.
And now we had 4 children at the time. Our 2 oldest were finishing up high school. Our oldest was going off to BYU, Idaho, so she was there. And so this was a really big change. He came every week for 2 years with me, and attended and was very open with our bishop about what he was experiencing, and that he actually no longer believed that there even was a God. That he believed all churches were probably fine and good. He hadn't studied church history. He hadn't delved into any of that. It had just totally been this physiological thing. And so he felt like, the Mormon church is as good as any other church. And he came and supported me. But through that transition for him, the ward not know quite how to navigate that with Jordan. He had been the young men's president for 5 years. And so we'd been really heavily involved. And so now all of a sudden he wasn't believing. He didn't disclose that and talk about that with other people, but the bishopric knew. And somehow, you know how those things happen in correlation meetings, and the word kind of got out, and people began to really pull back from us. And we had been in that ward for 15 years where, all of our social network were members, and we did things together. And
this is Ohio still?
Yeah. And
Cleveland or Columbus or Cincinnati?
Dayton.
Dayton, okay.
Kind of the Dayton area. And they just didn't know how to navigate it. It was like all of a sudden there was this drastic change. And even though all he wanted to do was the same things we'd always done, go out on our boat and go camping and hang out, they just felt uncomfortable. And so I was trying to go every week and make it work. And people were really pulling back. And that was super hard for us. And I had one Sunday in particular, I remember I reached out to them. I pulled everybody kind of in the overflow after sacrament meeting was over. I pulled my closest friends all in there. There was a group of us, and I basically just poured out my heart and said, guys, I'm trying so hard to make this to still come. And, I'm trying to navigate this huge change with my husband, and you guys are pulling back, and this is, so painful to me. And, please don't do that. It was very emotional. I made myself very vulnerable by expressing how much this was hurting me. And even so, after that, they just were not able to navigate it. We slowly just stopped getting invited to anything. We just became more and more isolated. And so every week I would go. And what began to happen was, over the next couple years, I began to notice things that I hadn't noticed before. As when you're the traditional Mormon family and everything's fine and you're both holding callings and you're both active, I didn't notice some of the stuff. And now I was this woman who had a husband who had returned from a mission and now didn't believe, wasn't coming. And suddenly I became acutely aware of people who didn't fit into that traditional box. So I would notice things in lessons and talks and comments that referred to feminists or people that didn't have children or single adults or about comments and things about people that had left the church. There were things that just began to stand out to me that I just hadn't noticed, and they began to make me uncomfortable. And I noticed more and more kind of this us versus them thing. And the way that the generalizations happened about people who stopped believing. And I had watched Jordan. I knew how hard he had tried to regain that testimony. It had been extremely painful for him. And so I began to realize, wait, those generalizations don't fit everybody, because I know they don't fit him. And so more and more that just I started noticing. And Prop 8 happened during that time. I remember Jordan and I talking about it, and me trying to hold on to the arguments that the Orthodox members were using and the church was using, and trying to say, well, there's got to be something more to this. And, there's got to be reasons. But having this kind of cognitive dissonance that began happening more and more for me. And that first 2 years of that transition from Jordan were really hard for us. Suddenly everything that you plan on as a couple is like drastically altered. You find yourself, you're married to somebody that maybe you would not have even dated and married because you were a Mormon. And so it was almost as if we had to learn how to communicate all over again. And we had to learn how to find commonalities that were outside church, which was super hard. I had not realized how much of the messaging and a part of our life was wrapped in this idea that we both thought the same things. And now that we didn't, it was like learning how to figure out how that was okay. It was okay that we were individual, that we didn't have to agree on the same things. And it was all right to respect each other. And Jordan was really, really great about not pushing me. He was totally supportive. He didn't bring things up. And he let me, do all the things I wanted to do, and was completely supportive of that and supportive of the kids. But every week was really hard for me, and it got harder and harder because as I got more isolated, I realized I was becoming more and more unorthodox, and some of my ideas were not meshing anymore, and I felt like I didn't fit in. Not only did I not fit in, but I started to disagree, and now we were completely alone. And so that was one of the big reasons we decided to move to Montana. So in between, now we had my daughter at BYU, Idaho. She got married in Idaho Falls. And I went in with her during her wedding and the temple ceiling, and Jordan sat outside. And that was really hard for us. But Jordan was really supportive. We did our daughter Jessica was wonderful. She and her soon-to-be husband, Jared, they agreed to do a beautiful ring ceremony. And so we really had a special ring ceremony afterwards where actually Jordan walked her down the aisle and we played music and he brought her to the front and they said beautiful things to each other and lit a candle. And so it was really special, but it was really hard. It was really hard. Hard for me to be in the temple without him, hard for my daughter, and hard for Jordan to be outside. So our son was on a mission. He went out on a mission to serve at Quebec, and Jordan wrote him and supported him and was really great about that. But during the time that he was out on his mission was the time that Jordan realized, I'm done. I've tried everything I can. This isn't working for me. I'm an atheist and I just can't make this work anymore. And I remember writing my son that on his mission, and how hard that was for him to get that letter on his mission and try to figure out how to react to that while being a missionary. So we decided that it's time for us to have a change. And luckily for us, Jordan had been traveling to Bozeman, Montana as a product manager. He was managing a product that was developed here. And our youngest daughter was about to graduate from high school. Junior high. So it was between junior high and high school. Our third son was just about to graduate from high school, and he was going to try a semester at BYU. He got into BYU in Provo, and he was not active anymore and really was not believing, but he thought, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to go there and I'm going to try for one semester and see if I actually believe. And so we put in for a transfer and we were able to move to Bozeman, Montana between that summer break, which was really awesome for us.
What year was that?
That was, 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago.
Okay. So 2011.
2011. So we got here and we thought, all right, the good thing about this is our ward will just know us as we are now. And that's what we were hoping. They won't know Jordan as a member. They won't have seen him Young Men's president. They'll just know that we're a part member family.
So he resigned? Did he resign?
He did not. No, he had not resigned at that point because I had asked him not to.
Okay.
But, we thought, well, this'll be easier for everybody. And so we moved here. I got called to be the first counselor in the Young Women's presidency. Began teaching the My Maids. I love the young women. I love youth. And we began going every week. And to our dismay, we realized that the messaging was the same. It wasn't just that it was our Ohio ward. It was the church messaging. And it really didn't matter where you were, that we were still outside the box. We still didn't fit. Kim, my youngest daughter, would struggle at Young Women's because the lessons would mention, a father with priesthood holder. and, temple marriage, and, how important it was to have parents that, stayed and endured. And I was sitting through the same type of messaging. And basically it was every week this idea that marriage was a tragedy. It was viewed in tragic terms, even though I had a fantastic husband, and Kim would try to say, "Look, my dad's awesome." The messaging was that it was a tragedy, and more we realized we just didn't agree with some things, and they were uncomfortable. And I tried the next 2 years to try that again, just continue with that unorthodox route. Could I make things work? Could I just pick and choose? Could I figure out how to fit in my ward, even if I didn't agree with some things? And that got harder and harder. And in 2012, we had an interesting kind of experience where there was an Ensign article that was written by an anonymous writer. And I think it was entitled something like "Why He Left" or something like that. I don't know, why he doesn't believe anymore, something. And it was written about a woman who was writing about her husband who had stopped believing. And I had several people reach out to me and ask me if I was the author. And Jordan had several of his family members reach out and ask him. And I hadn't read the article yet. So when I read it, I was really kind of dismayed, because the article itself, the tone of it, and the way the wife felt about her husband was not all how I felt about Jordan. And so, because I'd been asked several times, I felt like I needed to somehow let people know that no, I did not write this. And so I put it on Facebook, because that's what you do now. you put a status on Facebook. So I made a Facebook status, and I basically just said I just wanted people to know that I was not the author of this article. And actually, I don't feel that way about Jordan. I feel like that there are some things that you just have to go by on faith, that there are some things that we don't know. I don't think he's wrong, deceived, deluded, controlled by Satan, any of those things. I actually don't think that at all. I think he's done the best job he could in interpreting the information and coming to the best conclusion that works for him. And he feels the same about me. He doesn't feel I'm deluded or any of that. And so we have this mutual respect. And I was trying to explain on my Facebook post that we genuinely felt that way about each other, and that we didn't view each other as being wrong, because we felt like if we had that view, we wouldn't be able to have a healthy relationship. It wouldn't work for us. And so I kind of expressed myself like that, and somebody told my bishop about that post, and I got a visit from my bishop. And at that point, I had been giving myself permission to try to start pulling back. What I finally realized is that it was actually starting to really weigh on me emotionally and causing me distress. I was having a lot of headaches. I was taking so much ibuprofen for migraines and headaches. It's like all the years of trying to make this work had just really added up. And I was exhausted. I was tired. It was really starting to affect me. And so I had begun on some Sundays not going and giving myself a break. And we would still take Kim because she wanted to go. And when I did the Facebook post, I ended up having this meeting on my front porch with my bishop. And it kind of went like this, where he let me know that he was a little bit concerned about some of the things I'd expressed. Which surprised me, because basically the gist of what I was expressing was support for my husband, and unconditional love for my husband. But some of the things that I had said concerned him, especially the idea of not being able to know something. Know as in a Mormon term is I know the church is true, or I know God lives. He felt like he was concerned that I was saying you really couldn't know that. And I said, well, Bishop, I think that there are just some things in life that you can't know, like, does God exist? So if we take this basic disagreement that Jordan and I have, he doesn't believe in God anymore, and I still believe that there is something, there's like a creator and a God. There's no way either of us can know that. And he said to me, and I had heard this argument before, but never in person. He basically said, Alison, it really is like the law of gravity. And, there are people that may choose not to believe the law of gravity, but it doesn't matter because the law of gravity exists. And I tried to say, I don't think you could equate the law of gravity to a belief in God. But it was like we just didn't connect. I said, I need to take a break from church. And he told me that if I loved God and Christ enough, I would continue to slog through and come. And I remember saying to him, honestly, I've been doing this now for how many years? And I think that if God is actually my father and he loves me and he cares about me, he knows how much effort I am making into this and making this work, that he will be okay with me to take a break. And so I decided it was time for me to have a sabbatical, in essence. And during that sabbatical, my son had now returned home, obviously, from his mission. He was back at BYU, Idaho, and he was dating somebody. And I knew full well that at some point he was going to fall in love and he would be getting married. And my temple recommend had expired. And I started thinking about those recommend questions, wondering whether I could actually answer them again. And so I remember the last 3 years that we had been I would come home from church and I would be crying and it would be hard for me. And every once in a while, Jordan would kind of quietly say, "Are you sure this is still working for you?" And I would basically say, "It has to. It has to work. I have to make this work."
This being what?
I have to make the church work.
Oh, okay.
I have to stay in the church. I have to fit, I felt this. My parents were believing, my 2 oldest kids were believing. I had all these people that were now kind of viewing me as the strong one in the family, and that I was going to kind of hold the family together as far as the church was concerned. And so I just felt this enormous pressure to not have this thing fall apart. And so sometimes when I would think about reading something or trying to understand some of these things that would pop up on my shelf, I would literally make a conscious decision to avoid doing that because I was worried about what I might find, because I had to make it work. And so after this discussion with the bishop, as I thought about my temple recommend, I just thought, you know what? I just can't continue doing this anymore. I'm killing myself. I've either got to be in the church or I've got to figure out why I wouldn't be in the church. Because if it's actually true, then I have got to figure out how to make this work. As a wife with a non-believing husband, as someone who's unorthodox, as someone who doesn't understand LGBT, why the church has these views, why does the church have these views about gender roles, all these things that were bothering me. I just realized, okay, to me, it boiled down to, if it's true, then I have to make it work. And if it's not true, then wow, what does that mean? And so I decided I would basically approach it like I had always taught in all my lessons, which was the basic of your testimony. Joseph Smith, the Restoration, Prophets, the Book of Mormon. Those were kind of the 4 big things for me. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning on those. And I gave myself permission, finally, to go outside of what was just on my bookshelves from Deseret Book.
Uh-oh.
And yeah. And I began reading Fair Mormon. I began reading online. I began interacting and asking questions. I wrote a guest blog post that went up on Feminist Mormon Housewives, asking about the temple recommend questions, saying, here, I'm struggling with these. How do you guys handle these as unorthodox, feminists? And I began reading, and I began ordering books and books and books. And I tried really hard to, I read B.H. Roberts, and I read Givens, and I read the whole gamut. I read everything I could get my hands on. And for 9 months, I read and studied and asked questions. And it felt like I was drinking from a fire hose. And I didn't tell Jordan I was doing it because I didn't want him to get his hopes up or jump to any conclusions. I wanted it to be my decision with no impact from, by him. I didn't want anyone to say, well, he was the one, I wanted to figure it out for myself. And so he would see me at night reading, and he'd be like, wow, you are studying a lot. But we didn't talk too much about it for the first probably 6 months. And then I began starting to share after 6 months of reading some of what I was learning and reading. And that's when he became exposed to some of those unofficial narratives and historical things, which were very surprising to him at that point. And 9 months after I gave myself permission to do that, I realized I couldn't answer those temple recommend questions. I just did not believe some of those basic truth claims anymore. And I was really totally at peace with that. I felt like I had really tried my hardest, and I viewed the church now kind of like a good organization filled with people trying to do good things, but not inherently more true than any other church, not with any divine authority or guidance that was special above any other church. And if I was going to look for churches, I realized there was too much about this church that just didn't work anymore. If I was going to be shopping for a church now, it wouldn't be the Mormon church. And so that I knew that was going to be devastating to my older kids. But I reached out to them. I mean, they knew that I'd been becoming unorthodox. They knew because we shared things and I shared my views. So they were worried about me. And it was really hard for them to hear that their mom now had come to this place too, as well as their dad. But I did that right before my son was going to get married. He got engaged. And so this is when I told him, I can't come inside the temple. And this is why I can't answer those questions honestly. And I could fake it, and I could lie my way through it, and get that recommend, but I would not feel good about myself in doing it because I don't believe them anymore. And that was hard for him, to have his mom tell him she wasn't going to be in there. So we both sat outside for our son's wedding. And that was in August of 2013. And that fall, I resigned my membership. And George resigned as well. And the reason I resigned was because I really felt like I had watched what had happened with George all those years when he didn't resign. Part of it was that I knew there was a sense of responsibility in the war for him. The bishopric brought him up. There were home teachers that were assigned. There were visiting teachers that were assigned. People felt responsible for us. And also the bishop periodically asked if it was okay to talk to Jordan because he felt like he was still his leader. I mean, according to church, he was still his leader. And I just felt like I didn't want that at all. I did not want to have to monitor what I wrote on my Facebook. I did not want to be called and asked to meet with someone because of something I wrote or something I said. I didn't want that responsibility. And I was ready to officially disconnect myself from some of the things that I felt were really harmful about the church. So we resigned in 2013. And
that was before resigning was cool.
Yeah, I know.
I'm kidding. That was just a current events joke.
And yeah, so then we began navigating that mixed faith situation. 2 kids that are active, temple married, and 2 kids that now have left. And figuring out how to do that, which is super challenging in the church. The church doesn't give you material and help in doing that as parents and children when you're not all active members. And I became quite involved more and more online in the Facebook support groups. I began moderating for Mormon Stories, and just became more and more aware of that my experience was shared by lots and lots of other people. And that as people became unorthodox, they felt just like I had felt, like they couldn't quite fit in. They wanted to still be there. They wanted to make it work, but they didn't fit in. And often they felt quite excluded and isolated, even though they were still coming on Sunday. That it was a very lonely and isolating kind of an experience because as an unorthodox Mormon, you don't feel often, depending on your ward, that you can actually express yourself or share some of those nuanced views without making people uncomfortable. And so you kind of feel like you have tape on your mouth a lot. And so it's really challenging to be unorthodox. And I noticed that more and more online, and I had experienced that myself. And then I noticed that as people left, like I did, that there were also huge rippling consequences. They often lost their social networks, their friends, they lost their sense of community, and they also did not have places to help them gain some of the skills, the life skills, just like I had as a teenager. I didn't have those skills. So now you've got adults leaving the church who also don't have some of those skills. And some, it's hard for people. They don't they want to know, how do I keep my kids ethical and moral? They have all the same questions that everybody has. It's just now you're trying to navigate away from the church and figure out how to do it. And so that was really much aware on my mind. And I wanted to be able to figure out how to give back. And the first kind of thing I got involved with was we decided to write an open letter to Thomas S. Monson and ask him some things. We didn't anticipate that he would read it or we'd ever get an answer, but we decided to write it. That was the Mormon open letter. And that was kind of the first big thing that we did. And we had a lot of people sign it and read it. And then as things went on, I got interacted more with you, and you invited me to come to a weekend kind of get together, and we brainstormed ideas, and we were talking about things we could do to support people that were unorthodox or that were post-Mormon leaving. And we talked about community, and you had asked me if I would bring an idea. And so meanwhile, Jordan and I, when we moved to Bozeman, had started a meetup group. That's how we figured out we would meet friends. And we'd started it just with the two of us. I put things on there and it was just us. And then pretty soon people had joined. And we have, over 1,700 members in our group now. It's nothing to do with Mormonism, just entirely a social type of a thing outdoors. But as you asked me to share an idea, that was the idea that I thought, wow, I wonder if we could help people figure out how to make friends and find community by doing something like meetup, some way to pull people together. And so I came to your little get together with that idea in mind, and a little PowerPoint that I put together. And my suggestion and idea was, can we figure out a way to help build community? And while we were there, we all shared ideas, and that was great. And we kind of came back from that, and we kind of started running with it. And I asked Steve Holbrook, who had also worked with me on the Mormon open letter, if he would be willing to help me with those communities. And so he said, you bet. And what I basically just started doing was posting in every Facebook group I could come up with, hey, we want to help people start groups that will help them make friends, find support, build little group individual communities in their own areas where they live. Are you interested? Or do you already belong to one? Can you tell me about it? And I created a little Facebook group, which I called the admin group. And I just started collecting those groups and finding them that were out there. These were just meetup.com groups that had to do with Mormonism, Facebook groups that had to do with Mormonism, stuff that had been out there all over the place. Nobody really had collected it into one directory. And we just started adding them one by one into this admin group. And I just kept telling them, hey, at some point, we're gonna publish all of your groups in some sort of a directory. but I didn't really know what that was gonna look like, or how that was gonna happen. I just knew that, okay, we're building all these groups, we're finding all these groups, and somewhere we're going to host this directory. And as time went on, we realized there really wasn't a place to host it. We weren't sure where to put it. And so as part of our ideas, you had shared an idea of ultimately that you thought it would be really cool to have a website that had directories, resources, and things like that. But it hadn't been something that you had time to do, hadn't been something that you had the energy or time to do. And so I asked whether you would be okay if I actually ran with that idea. And you were awesome. You said, yeah, go for it. I don't have time to do it, make it happen. And so we just reached out. We pulled together a few people that were willing to do it. And in one of the What I needed was somebody that had tech skills, because that's what I don't have. I'm more than willing to work 200% at it, but I didn't know how to build a website. And so I reached out into the various groups saying, hey, I want to build a website and I need somebody who knows, WordPress. And in that admin group, happened to be one of the admins in that group was an admin that was running a group in Colorado. And his name was Jason Howard.
And he's appeared, by the way, with Eldon Karchner and his family on a previous Mormon Stories podcast episode, but never as his own interview. But Jason and his family are great.
And he was so great. And he said, I'd be interested in that. And he and I had a phone call. And I basically kind of shared some of my ideas on what I was kind of picturing in my head. Kind of, all right, here's a picture in my head of how I'd like the website to work, or things that I think we should keep in mind. And as we talked through those and he asked questions, at the end of that call, he said, I'll do it, but I'm super busy. And what he does is he builds websites. He has his own company, and this is what he does professionally. And he's built some really incredible websites for different organizations. And so he's extremely successful and busy. And he said, if I do this, it's got to be around that. So I can't have any kind of a time frame. If you want me to do it, you're going to have to kind of go on my time schedule. And that was completely understandable, and also probably one of the most challenging aspects for us. Because I tend to be one of these people that when I get an idea, I want to run 1,000 miles an hour at it. And of course I could run 1,000 miles an hour doing my part, but I couldn't actually build the thing. And so
I just have to say, you are one of the most tenacious, hardworking, committed people I know in the Mormon blogosphere. So,
well, I can be good and bad too. We started at the same time that I was still finding these Facebook groups, finding these meetup groups. We reached out to all the existing Mormon Stories groups and tried to find which ones were still active, which ones were still going. And we just started, as we were doing that, I began building the content for the website. And I had several people that were willing to kind of be more like an advisory board for me, which was really awesome. And those people are incredibly helpful to me. Carson Calderwood and Gwed Hutchin and Timothy Chow and Micah Nicolaisen. And, there were a number of people that were really wonderful, but they did not have the time to actually spend on it. So what happened was I would kind of throw out an idea in my little web team group, and I would say, hey guys, what do you think about this? And they would give me their feedback, and then I would go and do it. And so what I began doing was I began compiling all of the resources that I felt would be important. And what we mostly wanted, and we got your ideas, we had you on a phone call, we picked your brain about what you had thought, and then I just kind of took off from there and ran with it and started building these resources in files. And what we wanted to do was we wanted the website to be user driven. That was really, really important to me, that the user came in to the website, they feel safe. Because we know within Mormon culture, looking at things outside of what you're ready to look at is very uncomfortable. And it's uncomfortable because the church messaging tells you it should be uncomfortable. And so what I wanted to do was support the three groups of people that were most dear to my heart, that I cared about the most. We had to come up with kind of umbrellas then of how to separate those groups on the website so that we could put content in each of those groups and the user would be able to decide which content they wanted to go into. And that was challenging because, you had to kind of create these generic, huge umbrellas. And you had to come up with names for them. And all of that stuff is challenging to come up with a term or a name that's not going to make someone uncomfortable. And so I would post my ideas about the names or the words in different Facebook groups, in a Thoughtful Faith group, Exploring Sainthood group, Post-Mormon groups, and I would try to throw the words out and ask for feedback. Okay, tell me how you think about this. Would these be the words that describe you guys in this area? And the words we came up with were those, we decided to break them down We have, when you enter the website, that home, when you first pull it up, it's got a home page. And on the left side, there's this navigation. And if you already know exactly where you want to navigate to, you can select right from that left side navigation. If you don't, you'll see 3 little boxes that kind of give a brief description that help you maybe identify into a particular area. Because sometimes they won't know how to identify themselves. Am I unorthodox? Am I, post-Mormon? Am I, and so this way, people select into the area of the website that they want to do, and that's the content they see. They don't have to see the content that they don't want to see. And so we just, I spent a lot of time, finding all these links, finding all these resources, putting them into Word documents for Jason so that he could begin taking them and plopping them into the actual website design. And we kind of set ourselves up for a goal that we wanted to release at Sunstone. That was kind of our goal, to be done so that we could be there. We wanted to get a table and we wanted to be able to display it and actually showcase it at Sunstone.
2015.
2015. So, I mean, we worked, it was 6 months of working on it solidly. And it was probably full time for me, 6 months of working on it.
Wow, that's a lot of work.
It was a lot of work, but I loved it. It was super exciting for me. It was exciting to be finding all the resources and plopping them into these files for him. And then kind of waiting anxiously to get a peek from Jason on how it was actually going to look. And he would ask me questions on, all right, what do you think about this? Or he would show me something and I could give him feedback, I like that, or that looks good. Or, but really, when we went live at Sunstone, we did not have much of the content that's in there now in there. It was very basic. It was very bare bones because that's what he was able to accomplish at that point. But it was really a great reception by then to open it at Sunstone. People that came by the table and looked at it, they loved it.
And you had a banner and T-shirts and a display.
And it was really interesting that 6 months of working on it. There was a number of things that happened online, that sometimes made me decide, what am I doing? I'm crazy. I've lost my mind. I should just give up on this project. One was, which was interesting, I got pushback from all of the areas. It wasn't just one. So I got pushback from the post-Mormon groups and big name supporters because they weren't sure. They wanted to support a website and be involved with a website that would also be encouraging unorthodox and nuanced members and supporting them when they wanted to stay in the church. That felt uncomfortable to them. I got pushback from the progressive, nuanced, unorthodox members because they weren't sure they wanted to be involved with a website that would be all right and support people that decided to leave the church. And what I began to realize was, wow, I was trying to do something that had really not been done before on one website. We've got a lot of supporting material out there. We've got a lot of websites that are so awesome out there, but they typically are for just a particular part of the spectrum. They're not for the whole spectrum. And so you've got the unorthodox areas, you've got the post areas, and they don't really blend very often. And so what I was trying to do was actually show in one website that we really can support everybody no matter what they decide. That the first umbrella was that exploring Mormon. This for us was the Mormon that was just beginning to explore outside of the official church narratives and material. And then you had the unorthodox sections, and then you had the post sections. And I was trying to show, come on, guys, we really can do this. Like online in the progressive nuanced areas, we always hear this, let's support everybody and their choices. Let's actually do it then. And what I didn't anticipate was the pushback. I didn't anticipate that. I thought, especially online where we're more open-minded in Big Ten, I thought people would truly be all right with a website that was Big Tent. And there was actually significant pushback from all sides. And there were times where I thought maybe I was trying to do something that was really crazy and that I wasn't going to be able to get anybody's support. And part of that was that I realized also fairly early on that if I actually was going to have any shot of having across the board support, it had to be done by no big named person. It needed to not be associated with any particular part on that spectrum. Because if a well-named person like you, for instance, or John Larson, or somebody that's really well big, actually was behind it and heavily involved in it, I worried that it would just not get this widespread acceptance. And so I pulled that back and basically said we need to do this completely on kind of a neutral area. And I had to keep explaining that over and over to people, because people, well, who's behind it? Well, who's doing it? Well, it's me. It's me and Steve Holbrook and Jason Howard. Well, who are you guys? Oh, we're nobodies, and that's exactly what needs to happen. I mean, we don't have any big names. We're not well known at all. That's exactly kind of I felt who needed to do something like this. And people asked, well, who funded it? Well, nobody funded it. We funded it. Well, you didn't take donations, and wait, how could you do this? It really was just a completely grassroots effort. There was no fundraising. There was no donors. There was no big names involved. We went to you in the beginning, and you gave us your ideas, and then you were hands off. The same was with all of the different groups. Everybody was waiting to see what would happen. So, and I think that I feel really good about that decision. I feel like that was really, really important in order for it to be neutral. And I think that once people saw the website and saw that it actually was across the board like that, I think that helped them be more supportive of it. But it was definitely a challenge to work our way through that. So, and since Sunstone, I was able to use Jason's templates and do crash course on WordPress. and I've actually added all of the content since we first went live. So I've built all of the additional pages, and I've added all of the additional content that's been added since then, because I could just copy his initial page template and build on that and change it and adapt it, which was really wonderful, because he's been too busy to help since then.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. And here we are.
Okay. So what I'm going to do, I wanted to have this interview be in two parts. So this is a little over an hour. It's a great sort of treatment of your history and the history of Mormon Spectrum. So what I'm going to do is have you kind of wrap up and just kind of close out this interview as being about your story. And then I want to come back just as, maybe a briefer interview, but in the next interview, sort of just have it be totally focused on someone who wants to learn for the first time what Mormon Spectrum is and what these communities are about and how they get involved. And it won't be about the history. It'll be just about how to use it. Does that make sense?
Perfect.
So just really quick to close this interview, you probably know that with Mormon Stories, we often end by people sharing something they've learned or something they feel or kind of their uncorrelated testimony. You've shared with us a lot how you were raised in Germany, how you were inactive for a long time, how you kind of became reactivated, married in the temple, and eventually had your husband fall away, and then had a part member family, and now you're both out, and then you've done this online activism. If you wanted to sort of make a conclusion to this interview of whatever you would want to share with the audience from all those experiences, and that's a lot to cover, how would you end this part of the interview?
I think I'd probably say that I hope people, if they do listen to this, I hope that they can tell that I genuinely care about people in all of those different situations, and that I understand and recognize from personally being through those how hard and difficult and painful those are. And I want people to know that there are other people that are out there to support them and love them and that understand them. And also that it's okay to follow your instincts, that it's It's really hard and fearful to trust yourself, especially when you start to trust yourself and you're going outside the messaging that you've always been raised with. There's so much fear involved in that. But there's also, when you allow yourself to do that, oh my gosh, it's really wonderful and it's liberating, and you understand that you can make decisions and you are capable of sorting through this, and whatever the outcome is, whatever you choose to do, whether it's to remain then as a more progressive, aware, historically aware member because you find value in community and spiritual benefits to it, that's wonderful. And if you don't, that's okay too, and that's wonderful. That really everybody doing this and all these online groups and all this interaction that we do with each other, I really genuinely believe that people are just trying to figure it out, and that people are trying to live with integrity, and that's what I'm trying to do. And that's what I've tried to share with my family and my kids that do believe. All those things that I taught them, I still believe are important, and being honest and hardworking and seeking out the stuff that works for you, and that I'm trying to live my life with integrity just like they are. And I think that we can learn how to respect each other's differences. I wish that we got that messaging more from the church itself, but I think we can help each other with it. And I am an honest believer in the fact that we can be Big Tent. And in my Big Tent, I would include post-Mormonism. We're all in there. We've got this connection of the church together that kind of binds us all together. And we're all just trying to live our life the best we can. So.
How about, real quickly, that was very nice. What about how's it been to sort of be involved in a project and trying to make a difference? What's that been like for you? And what would you tell others in terms of that experience of just trying to make a difference in tangible ways through some sort of project?
I mean, for me, it's been wonderful. You hear that. I grew up frequently hearing my dad use that phrase, when people leave the church, they can't leave it alone. And he used it in a sense of kind of that it supposed meant that the church was actually true, because see, people can't leave it alone when they leave. And I have had repeatedly people ask me, I don't understand, why are you doing this? Why do you even care? If you don't believe it, why are you spending so much energy at it? And I would say it's not all the same for all of us. We all have our own stages that we work through with this. For me, as part of my stages of working through it, I reached out online and became quite involved. And there were people that reached out and supported me. And I saw this need, and I feel like we can make a difference. And when people say, why can't you leave it alone? And why would you do this, Alison, as a post-Mormon? Why can't you just walk away? Mormonism is still a part of me. I'm not embarrassed at all to let people know that I was raised Mormon, that I was married in the temple, that I raised my kids for the first, 20-something years of my marriage in the church. It was a part of my life. It's a part of me. So I don't have to let that part go. Just because I don't believe that part doesn't mean I have to let all my Mormon cultural heritage go. It still is important to me, and especially important because I have active believing kids, and now 2 grandkids and a third one on the way. They're going to be a part of the church. I want the church to be a healthier environment for them. For the Unorthodox members that are staying, I want it to be healthier for them. And so if I can help and give back and be involved in projects that can make that happen, that's awesome. Why wouldn't I want to do that? Why wouldn't I want to give back? Because it's a win-win for me. I'm serving in a way that brings me a personal sense of fulfillment, and I'm helping other people. And not everybody wants to do that and needs to do that. But for those of us who have the opportunity to do that, it's really awesome. We can help each other quite a bit. And I saw something the other day in Mormon Stories on a thread in the Facebook group, and the guy said, I don't try to get people to leave the church, and I don't. What I try to do is be supportive of everybody. And he used the term pro-post-Mormon, which I liked a lot. I would say definitely, if I'm honest, I'm pro post-Mormon. I mean, I think post-Mormonism is awesome and it's wonderful, and I'm happy, and it's worked for me. But I'm also pro whatever works for you. So, I think being involved and helping each other find support is hugely valuable.
Well, you've made a huge contribution to Mormonism, so congratulations. Hats off to you and Mormon Spectrum and the whole Mormon Spectrum team.
Thanks, John.
All right, so we'll come back next episode and do sort of a treatment just for the Mormon transitions people, and it'll just be about Mormon Spectrum. Does that sound all right?
Yep, sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Alison, Udall, and Mormon Stories listeners. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for your support. Please join us at mormonstories.org if you want to ask Alison questions, if you have feedback or thoughts. We just are grateful for your support and participation. We hope to see some of you online. All right, Alison, we'll talk to you in a sec.
Okay, bye.
All right.